She brought 17 complaints to the hearing. I brought the deed. The 17th time Linda Barrett called the cops on my nearly $10 million Montana ranch. I knew this wasn't about noise anymore. Every complaint was false. My ranch wasn't even inside her HOA, and yet she kept building a file with my name on it. Then I plotted all 17 complaints on a map and saw they were pointing toward the same piece of my land beside Silver Pine Lake. What I found next turned her entire plan upside down because the woman trying to force a road across my ranch had overlooked one recorded boundary that had been there for decades. Stay with me, because when the sheriff finally checked whose ground she was standing on, everything changed. And if you enjoy stories where patience, paperwork, and the truth matter more than shouting, subscribe and ride along. This one proves that sometimes the strongest answer to somebody abusing authority is simply knowing exactly where your property line stands. The first red and blue flash hit the fence before sunrise. I was halfway through feeding the horses when the light swept across the north pasture, bounced off the barn doors, and disappeared into the thin fog hanging over Mercer Ridge Ranch. For a second, I just stood there with the feed scoop in my hand. Then the cruiser came through the wooden gate. Sheriff Daniel Ruiz parked beside my pickup and stepped out slowly. He had the look of a man already tired of the conversation he was about to have. "Morning, Caleb." "Daniel." He glanced toward the barn, then across the pasture. Nothing was running, no tractor, no skid steer, no generator, just horses shifting in their stalls and the low rush of water spilling through the old dam below Silver Pine Lake. Daniel pulled a folded complaint sheet from his jacket. "Silver Pines called again." I set the scoop down. "What is it this time?" "Heavy equipment operating before 5 in the morning. Repeated industrial noise. Possible disturbance to nearby residents." I stared at him. "You hear any heavy equipment?" Daniel looked around again. The silence answered for him. Mercer Ridge Ranch covered enough ground that a tractor working the south field could barely be heard from my own house, much less from Silver Pines. The HOA subdivision sat beyond the western rise, hundreds of feet outside my property line, and my ranch had never belonged to it. Not 1 acre, not 1 fence post, not 1 foot of road. Daniel sighed and wrote something on the complaint form. Unfounded. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt tired. "How many does that make?" He stopped writing. Then he looked at me. 17. The number landed harder than I expected. I had saved every complaint. Noise, livestock odor, dust, improper fencing, road obstruction, exterior lighting, a loose dog that wasn't mine. Once they complained that cattle trailers were lowering neighborhood property values, even though the trailers were parked behind a ridge none of them could see. Every complaint had been checked. Everyone had gone nowhere. 17 calls, I said, and you still have to drive out here every time. If dispatch sends it, I answer it, I know. Daniel closed the folder, but he didn't head back to his cruiser. That bothered me. He lowered his voice. 1 complaint is somebody being difficult. 3 or 4 can be a feud. He paused. 17 is a record. I looked at him. What are you saying? I'm saying somebody may be trying to build something on paper. The irritation in my chest changed shape. Build what? I don't know yet. But if someone keeps creating reports with your name attached, eventually the existence of the reports becomes the story, even if every individual complaint falls apart. That was the first thing anyone had said that made the last several months feel different, not random, not petty, deliberate. Daniel handed me the copy. Keep this one with the others. Dates, times, what I observed. Everything. I already do. Good. His eyes shifted past me toward the county road. I followed them. A white SUV was parked just beyond my fence. Linda Barrett stood beside it, president of Silver Pines HOA Dark Coat, coffee cup in one hand, phone raised in the other, recording us. She wasn't hiding behind a tree or pretending to check messages. She had positioned herself where she could see my gate, Daniel's cruiser, and most of the barn. When she realized I was looking at her, she didn't lower the phone. She smiled. A small, satisfied smile. Daniel's expression tightened. "She been there long enough to know exactly when you arrived." I walked toward the gate, but stopped well inside my property. Linda kept filming. I didn't shout, didn't wave, didn't give her anything she could edit into another version of me. Daniel watched her for another few seconds. "Caleb." "Yeah?" "Start treating this like evidence." Then he climbed into his cruiser and drove back down the gravel road. Linda stayed until his taillights disappeared. Only then did she get into the SUV and leave. I finished feeding the horses, but the morning had changed. By 7, I was sitting at my kitchen table with 17 complaint reports spread across the wood. I had owned Mercer Ridge Ranch for 10 years, nearly $10 million in pasture, timber, lake frontage, water infrastructure, and working ground my family had fought to hold together long before Silver Pines existed. They had no jurisdiction here. Linda knew it, the board knew it, the sheriff knew it, so why keep calling? I looked down at 17 sheets of paper carrying 17 accusations that had produced exactly nothing. Daniel's words stayed with me. Somebody was building a record. The question was no longer whether Linda Barrett wanted to make my life difficult. The question was what she planned to do once she believed that record was big enough. And why a woman with no authority over Mercer Ridge Ranch needed 17 police calls to get there. By 8 that morning, I had stopped reading the complaints as accusations and started reading them as coordinates. I spread a Heritage County parcel map across the kitchen table and numbered every complaint by date. Then I marked where each alleged violation supposedly happened. Number 3, livestock odor near the north fence. Number 6, dust from a ranch road above Silver Pine Lake. Number 9, unsafe fencing near the old dam service road. Number 12, exterior lighting on the north barn. Number 15, obstruction near the lake approach. Number 17, heavy equipment supposedly operating from the same side of the ranch. The red marks began clustering. A knock sounded at the back door. Walt Harris stepped inside carrying his thermos. He was 63, owned the ranch east of mine, and had known these hills longer than most county maps had. "You look like you're planning an invasion. Maybe somebody else is." I showed him the map. Walt leaned over it. At first he said nothing. Then he took my pencil and circled 5 marks. "These aren't spread across your ranch." "No. They're following the north side." "Exactly." Mercer Ridge covered more than 2,000 acres, but almost every complaint that named a location pointed toward the same narrow section. North pasture, the old dam, and the slope descending toward Silver Pine Lake. Walt straightened. "A lawyer." 2 hours later, Rachel Coleman was sitting where Walt had been. Rachel handled land use disputes, easements, water rights, and boundary cases. She didn't care what an HOA claimed in a letter. She cared what had been recorded at the courthouse. She studied the complaint stack before opening her laptop. First question. Has Mercer Ridge Ranch ever signed a declaration joining Silver Pines? No. Annexation agreement? No. Shared covenant? Not that I've ever seen. She pulled up the county GIS system and layered the Silver Pines subdivision plat over my parcel. A clean boundary appeared. Silver Pines ended west of my ranch, not close enough for ambiguity. Rachel measured the nearest point. 642 feet, so Linda's jurisdiction is 642 feet short. Rachel gave me a dry look. Legally, 6 inches would be enough. She printed the map. Whatever Linda Barrett is doing, HOA Enforcement Authority isn't the basis for it. That should have been good news. It wasn't. Because it meant Linda knew she couldn't enforce those notices and kept generating them anyway. I pushed my marked map toward Rachel. Look at where the complaints fall. She compared it to the county layer. Her expression changed. Rachel stopped reading the allegations entirely. She traced the cluster with one finger. North pasture, dam service road, lake approach. Then she zoomed out. What? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked, who uses this road? The dam service road. Mostly me. Maintenance vehicles if there's work on the spillway. And this? She pointed to a narrow line farther west. Old ranch track, runs above the lake. Where does it go? Toward Silver Pines, eventually. There's a fence between us. Rachel leaned back. Walt stepped closer. You seeing something? Maybe. She drew a line through the complaint locations. The 17 dots weren't perfectly straight, but they formed a corridor, from the edge of Silver Pines toward the north pasture, from the north pasture toward the lake. My irritation from that morning hardened into something colder. They aren't documenting the ranch, Rachel looked at me. No, they're documenting one route through it. The room went quiet. Outside, a pickup passed on the county road. Somewhere below the house, water moved steadily through the dam. Walt tapped the map. Why would an HOA need a route across Caleb's ground? That, Rachel said, closing the complaint folder, is the question we answer before we do anything else. She told me not to contact Linda, not to challenge the board, not to remove anything if markers or notices appeared near the boundary without photographing them first. From now on, she said, assume every action is meant to produce a document, so we produce better documents. Exactly. Rachel gathered copies of the complaints, but left the marked map with me. After she and Walt left, I pinned it to the wall beside the kitchen door. 17 red dots. For months, Linda had made them look like proof that I couldn't manage a ranch. Now they looked like something else, a trail, and every step of it pointed toward the same narrow stretch of Mercer Ridge Ranch beside Silver Pine Lake. The first physical proof showed up 3 days later, an orange survey stake driven 6 inches inside my north fence, fresh dirt around its base, and beyond it, farther down the slope toward the dam, I could see another. Then another. I counted 9 before I reached the service road. Bright orange caps, freshly driven, spaced with too much precision to be random. I took out my phone and photographed everyone before touching anything. Wide shot, close-up, fence line, GPS location, timestamp. Rachel had been clear. Assume every action is meant to produce a document, so I produced mine first. I was photographing stake number 7 when tires rolled over gravel behind me. A white SUV stopped near the gate. Linda Barrett stepped out with a Silver Pines board member I recognized as Martin Cole and a man carrying survey equipment. Linda walked toward me as if she had an appointment. Mr. Mercer, you're on private property. We're conducting a community boundary safety assessment. Looked at the orange stakes running behind her. Your community ends 642 feet west of my boundary. Martin lifted a tablet and began taking pictures. The survey technician didn't look at me at all. His attention stayed on the slope, the lake, and the old dam road. Linda opened a folder. Silver Pines is reviewing several boundary-related safety concerns. Review them from Silver Pines. Her mouth tightened. These lines are more complicated than you're suggesting? No, they're recorded. Boundaries aren't always as permanent as owners think. That sentence told me more than anything in her folder. I pulled out my phone again and hit record. Say that one more time. Linda stared at the screen. You don't have permission to record me. Montana law doesn't give you control over my phone while you're standing on my ranch. Martin stopped taking pictures. The survey technician finally looked up. I pointed toward the gate. All 3 of you leave. Linda didn't move. We have a responsibility to evaluate potential hazards affecting community access. Show me the recorded easement. Silence. Court order? Nothing. County authorization? Linda snapped the folder closed. We don't need to litigate every procedural detail with you in the dirt. You do if the dirt belongs to me. The surveyor stepped past us and planted another stake. That changed the conversation. "Stop," he froze. I walked toward him but kept several feet between us. "What's your name?" "Chris Nolan." "Who hired you, Chris?" He glanced at Linda. "I'm contracted for preliminary field work." "By Silver Pines?" Linda cut in. "That's not relevant." It became relevant when he drove a marker into my property. I photographed the fresh stake. Then I called Daniel Ruiz. Linda laughed under her breath. "Calling the sheriff again? That's becoming a pattern, Caleb." I looked at her. "No, Linda. You calling him is the pattern." That wiped away the smile. Daniel arrived 15 minutes later. He listened to Linda first. She described the visit as a legitimate assessment connected to evolving access concerns. She showed him a printed map, shaded in pale blue, with a proposed review area extending onto my north pasture. Daniel studied it. "Is this recorded?" Linda hesitated. "It reflects a pending interpretation." That wasn't my question. Rachel arrived before Linda could answer. I had texted her the moment the SUV appeared. She took one look at the map. "This is a planning overlay. It has no effect on title, jurisdiction, or possession." Linda turned toward her. "And you are?" "Rachel Coleman, Mr. Mercer's attorney." That was the first moment Linda looked uncertain. Rachel walked to the nearest stake and photographed its location. "Who authorized entry?" Linda said nothing. Daniel closed the folder. "Mrs. Barrett, unless you have a recorded easement, court order, or written permission from Mr. Mercer, this isn't an inspection. It's trespass." Martin lowered his tablet. Linda's face stayed controlled, but her voice sharpened. "We're protecting homeowners." Daniel pointed toward the gate. "Protect them from your side of the property line." For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Chris began collecting his equipment. I stopped him before he pulled the stakes. "Leave them." Linda looked surprised. "They're evidence now." Rachel gave me a slight nod. One by one, the three of them walked back toward the SUV. Before Linda got in, she turned. "This issue isn't going away. Neither is the boundary." She slammed the door. The SUV disappeared over the ridge. Daniel left a few minutes later after noting the unauthorized entry and marker placement. Rachel stayed. We walked the line of stakes together. She measured their spacing and compared them with the county map on her tablet. "These weren't placed to inspect your fence," she said. "I know." The orange line cut downhill past the north pasture, bent around a rocky rise, and aimed toward the dam service road. Rachel stopped at the final marker. From there, Silver Pine Lake opened below us. The old dam sat to the east. The Silver Pines subdivision lay beyond the western ridge. And suddenly, the route looked obvious. Not a boundary inspection, not a safety review. A corridor. I looked back toward the gate. Whatever they're planning, they already know where they want to go. Rachel followed the stakes with her eyes. Then we find out what's waiting at the other end. The survey technician hadn't cared about my barn, my livestock, or my fence. He had been measuring a path to the lake. Rachel found out why 2 days later. She called before noon. "Come to my office. Don't call Linda. Don't call the HOA. Just come." When I arrived, Rachel had 3 county planning files open across her conference table. The first page carried a name I had never seen before. Silver Pine North Shore Expansion. Below it, 86 residential lots. Developer, Eric Dalton. Rachel pushed an engineering map toward me. Dalton filed the first version 18 months ago. That stopped me. The complaints against my ranch had started months later. What happened to the project? Heritage County Planning sent it back twice. She pointed to the road network. Silver Pines had one primary entrance serving the existing subdivision. The proposed expansion would push homes farther around the lake and increase traffic along the northern shore. The county wanted a second emergency route, Rachel said. Fire access, evacuation, construction capacity. Dalton's original options were either too steep or too expensive. She placed another engineering sheet beside it. A heavy black line crossed the north pasture of Mercer Ridge Ranch. I recognized the curve immediately, the survey stakes. The route entered near my north fence, followed the natural grade toward the old dam service road, then continued toward the proposed development. How much cheaper? Rachel checked the estimate, compared with their eastern alternative. Several $1,000,000 before maintenance. There it was, not aesthetics, not livestock, not noise, money. My land turned a difficult development into a profitable one. Did they ever ask me? Not according to the planning file. They could have. Rachel looked at me. Would you have sold an access easement? No. Maybe they knew that. She opened the second folder. This one wasn't a development plan. It was a preliminary submission from Silver Pines HOA requesting county consideration of a secondary community safety corridor. The language sounded harmless until Rachel showed me the supporting section. Documented nuisance activity adjacent to proposed emergency route. Repeated law enforcement response. Livestock interference, road obstruction, landowner resistance to community safety measures. My name appeared 3 times. I read the page twice. They're using the complaints. They made the complaints, then cited the existence of those complaints as evidence. Rachel nodded. The reports don't have to prove you're guilty to create political pressure. 17 sheriff responses look different in a hearing packet than 17 unfounded complaints spread across months. I felt anger rise, but underneath it was something worse. For the first time, I could see a legal mechanism behind Linda's behavior. What are they asking the county to do? Nothing final yet. This is groundwork. But the direction is obvious. Rachel tapped the proposed corridor. If the HOA can frame this as emergency access instead of developer convenience, they can argue the public benefit outweighs your refusal. That doesn't mean they automatically win an easement. Far from it. But they can make you spend time and money defending against one. I walked to the window. Across the street, people were going into the courthouse carrying folders, paying taxes, recording deeds, doing ordinary things that depended on records being honest. Linda had understood something simple. If she couldn't move my fence, she could try to change what people believed was happening behind it. What about Eric Dalton? Rachel opened the third file. His company had purchased options on land north of Silver Pines. The agreements depended on development approval. If the project dies, she said, those options lose value, so he needs the road. He needs a viable second access, and Linda is giving him one. She's trying. I looked again at the map. The black route ran across ground my family had held long before Silver Pines put up its first mailbox. Suddenly, every ridiculous complaint made sense. The dust, the livestock, the road obstruction, the noise. They weren't trying to enforce HOA rules on me. They were trying to create a version of Caleb Mercer that Heritage County might eventually find easier to overrule. Rachel slid a copy of the preliminary petition toward me. There's one more problem. What? If Linda gets enough homeowners behind the safety argument, this stops looking like one HOA president fighting one rancher. It becomes hundreds of residents claiming one landowner is blocking emergency access. That was the first moment I understood how dangerous the strategy could become. Not because Linda owned my land, because she didn't need ownership to make defending it expensive. I folded the map and put it into my evidence binder. What do? We don't panic. We don't threaten anyone. We prove the complaints are false, trace the development timeline, and find every recorded right attached to that corridor. Deeds, easements, water records, old plats, everything. I looked down at Eric Dalton's proposed road. For 17 complaints, Linda had been building a story about me. Now I finally knew the ending she wanted. A county hearing, a forced access argument, and a road carved through Mercer Ridge Ranch to make somebody else's development worth millions. I had the deed to my ranch. Linda had HOA votes, developer money, and the words public safety. For the first time since Daniel's 17th visit, I wasn't wondering what they wanted. I was wondering whether owning the land would be enough to stop them from taking the right to cross it. The answer started showing up in mailboxes. 2 mornings later, Walt brought me a folded flyer from Silver Pines. Protect our families. Support emergency access. My name appeared halfway down the page. Caleb Mercer has repeatedly refused reasonable cooperation despite documented nuisance activity and growing safety concerns. Below that was a photograph of my north fence, taken from the county road. The orange survey stakes were visible behind it. They're turning this into a campaign, Walt said. They already did. By noon, Rachel confirmed the next move. Heritage County had received a preliminary petition signed by more than 100 Silver Pines homeowners asking planners to evaluate a second emergency corridor through Mercer Ridge Ranch. It wasn't an order, it wasn't an easement, but it was enough to get a hearing scheduled if Linda kept gathering signatures. Rachel stood in my kitchen with the petition spread beside the 17 complaints. This is pressure, Caleb, not ownership. Pressure can still cost me the road. It can cost you money, time, legal fees, maybe months of uncertainty, but they still have to prove a lawful basis. I looked at the signatures. Some belonged to people I knew, people who bought hay from me, people whose trucks I had pulled from snowdrifts, people who had waved when we passed on the county road. That afternoon, I stopped at the feed store. The place went quiet when I walked in. Not completely, just enough. A man near the counter looked away. Another picked up a bag of mineral salt he clearly hadn't been studying before. One woman I knew from Silver Pines finally spoke. Caleb, people are scared. Of what? Fire season. Evacuation. Linda says you won't let emergency vehicles through. There is no emergency road to let them through. She says you refused to discuss one. I was never asked. The woman frowned. That mattered, for about 2 seconds. Then someone behind her said, maybe now isn't the time to argue. I bought what I came for and left. Outside, a Silver Pines flyer had been tucked under my windshield wiper. For the first, the campaign felt larger than Linda. She had taken 17 false complaints and turned them into a story people could repeat without ever seeing the reports. I drove home angry, not reckless, just tired, in the way a man gets tired when people who should know better decide paperwork is easier to believe than him. That evening, I opened the old fireproof cabinet in my father's office. I hadn't gone through everything in years. My father had kept land records like other men kept photographs, tax plats, water certificates, fence agreements, old survey copies, receipts from dam repairs. He had spent most of his life protecting Mercer Ridge from drought, debt, and bad years. My brother had done the same until he was gone. There were names in that cabinet that still hurt to see. For a while, I just sat there with the drawer open. Linda had found the one pressure point I hated admitting existed, not losing money, losing ground my family had held while burying people who were supposed to help me carry it. I pulled the first folder free, then another. If they wanted a paper fight, I had paper too. By 9, my dining table was covered. Deeds, tax plats, water rights, old access agreements, dam inspection records. Rachel arrived after I sent her photographs of the stack. Walt came 20 minutes later. We worked without much talking. Rachel sorted documents by recording date. I matched parcel numbers. Walt read the old handwritten notes my father had scribbled in margins. Then he stopped. Caleb, he was holding a deed from decades before Silver Pines existed. What? Walt tapped one line. Old North Dam service strip. Rachel took the paper. Her eyes moved slowly across the legal description. Then she reached for the county map. What do you remember about this? Walt leaned back. Your grandfather used to say the Lake subdivision never got everything they thought they bought. Rachel looked at him sharply. What does that mean? I don't know. I was a kid. He pointed toward the west side of the map. But I remember arguments about the dam road, and something about shoreline access, Rachel placed the deed flat beneath the kitchen light. This document predates the Silver Pines plat. My anger faded into concentration. Does it help us, maybe? She wasn't ready to say more. That was Rachel. No guessing when a recorded line could decide $10 million worth of land. Walt stared at the deed another moment, then looked at me. Before they take your road, find out who owns the ground under theirs. The room went still. Outside, Silver Pine Lake was black beyond the pasture, the old dam barely visible against the ridge. For weeks, Linda had been asking everyone to look at what I supposedly refused to give her. That night, for the first time, we started asking a different question. What had Silver Pines been using all these years because nobody had ever bothered to check who actually owned it? Rachel refused to answer from copies. We need the chain of title. The next morning, the three of us met at the Heritage County Courthouse. The oldest property records weren't digitized. A clerk led us downstairs to a basement room lined with steel drawers, plat books, microfilm, and deed indexes going back generations. Rachel started with Mercer Ridge. I started with Silver Pines. Walt searched the old dam records. For 2 hours, we found nothing dramatic. Transfers, tax descriptions, utility easements, survey corrections. Then Rachel pulled a deed recorded decades before Silver Pines existed. Caleb.I moved beside her. The document covered a sale by my grandfather to the company that eventually developed the Western Shore. Rachel read the granting language once, then again. What? The exclusions. She pointed. The deed conveyed several hundred acres, but specifically reserved the old North Dam service strip. Another exception followed the shoreline for roughly 1,000 feet. A third legal description covered a narrow tract running between what later became Silver Pines and the lake. I felt the first spark of hope. So we still own it? Slow down. Rachel turned immediately to the next deed, then the next. A reservation in one document meant nothing if the property had been conveyed later. We followed every transfer, my grandfather to my father into the Mercer family trust, the trust to me when I took full ownership of the ranch. The same reserved tracts kept appearing: dam, strip, shoreline, narrow western parcel, never conveyed, never released, never quit-claimed. Walt found an old plat book and opened it across another table. Look, a faded survey showed the original ranch boundary bending along Silver Pine Lake before cutting west. The future subdivision was drawn in pencil on a later overlay. One thin strip between the subdivision and lake remained attached to Mercer land. Rachel compared the calls. North 87 degrees. She ran a ruler along the plat, then stopped. What? If this monument still exists, the modern GIS line may be simplifying the parcel, meaning the online map we've been using may not show the actual deed boundary precisely. That changed everything. We found the dam records next. A maintenance agreement from years before the HOA formed granted limited passage for inspection and repair. Passage, not ownership, not development access, not construction rights. Rachel photographed every page. What does this give us? It gives us a theory strong enough to survey, not proof. The deed is evidence. But I'm not walking into a county hearing and claiming Silver Pines built on Mercer land until a licensed surveyor ties these descriptions to monuments on the ground. That restraint was exactly why I trusted her. We left the courthouse with certified copies ordered and 3 legal descriptions marked for field verification. At the ranch, Rachel walked the north side with the old plat in one hand and a GPS map in the other. We followed the dam service strip first. That part made sense. Then we continued west. The old legal description didn't stop where I expected. It kept going, past the slope, along the shoreline, toward Silver Pines. I could see the subdivision's main lake gate in the distance, a black metal entrance where residents accessed the lakeside road. Rachel stopped. She checked the plat, then the gate, then the plat again. Don't get excited. You've said that 3 times today. I'll say it 30 more if it keeps you from doing something stupid. I haven't done anything. Good. Keep doing that. She pointed toward the gate. If these calls close where I think they close, that access area is going to be very interesting. Walt gave a low whistle. How interesting? Rachel folded the map. Licensed surveyor, interesting. That evening, I walked down to the old dam alone. Water rolled through the spillway with the same steady sound I'd heard since I was a boy. Across the lake, lights from silver pines reflected in broken lines on the surface. For weeks, I had felt like the ground beneath me was being negotiated by people who didn't own it. Now, buried in courthouse drawers, we had found documents saying my family had reserved land everyone seemed to have forgotten. But forgotten land wasn't the same as proven land. One wrong monument, one later easement, one recording we'd missed. Any of those could kill the entire argument. So I didn't call Linda. I didn't move a fence. I didn't close a road. I waited. 2 days later, Rachel called. I hired a licensed surveyor. When does he start? Tomorrow. If the deed closes where you think. She went quiet for a second. Then Silver Pines has a much bigger problem than your 17 complaints. I looked across the water toward their lake gate. Until that moment, Linda had believed the fight was about getting across my ranch. The survey was about to tell us whether she had overlooked something far more dangerous, whether the ground beneath her own access had belonged to Mercer Ridge all along. Rachel's surveyor arrived before 8 the next morning. His name was Thomas Reed, and unlike the technician Linda had brought onto my land, Thomas worked slowly. He started with the old monuments, checked the dam service strip, then ran the deed calls west toward Silver Pines. Rachel stayed beside him most of the day. I stayed out of the way. By late afternoon, Thomas had placed 3 temporary markers near the subdivision's lake access. Then he stopped. Rachel. She walked over. He pointed at the black metal gate Silver Pines residents had used for years. The deed line crosses here. I thought I had heard him wrong. Across the gate? Thomas nodded. Not just the gate. He unfolded his field sketch on the hood of his truck. The Mercer tract extended beneath part of the access road, continued along a section of HOA fencing, then followed the shoreline toward the old dam strip. Rachel checked his measurements against the certified deed. How confident? I want one more closure check. He ran it, then another. The numbers held. The main lake gate Silver Pines called common property sat on land titled to Mercer Ridge Ranch. For a moment, nobody said anything. Walt finally broke the silence. So they need Caleb's land to reach the lake? Thomas shook his head. They already have a limited recorded access privilege. Rachel pulled out the old maintenance agreement we had found in the courthouse. That matters, she said. This is not a license for Caleb to lock out residents whenever he feels like it. I nodded. What does it allow? Existing access for limited lake and maintenance use. That's it. No expansion? No. Construction traffic? No. New road? Absolutely not. That was the reversal. Linda had spent months trying to portray me as a man blocking her community's rights. The documents showed her community's existing access depended on rights crossing land I actually owned, and those rights were narrower than she had been claiming. Rachel looked at me carefully. Do not close that gate. I wasn't planning to. Good. Because if you overreach now, you give Linda exactly what she's been trying to manufacture. That mattered. This wasn't about revenge. It was about proving who had authority and who didn't. The next discovery came that evening. Rachel had been tracing Eric Dalton's filings while the survey work continued. She arrived at my kitchen table with a single contract page. Linda's name is on this. I read it. Consulting agreement. Community integration services. Payment contingent on advancement of the Silver Pine North Shore expansion. The amount was enough to explain a lot of enthusiasm, so she's being paid. If the project advances, yes. And the road is what makes it advance. Rachel nodded. The motive was finally complete, but I didn't feel the rush I expected. The contract proved Linda had a financial interest. The survey proved something more important. She was wrong about the land. I pushed the contract aside. This isn't our main argument, Rachel studied me. No, if we walk into the hearing yelling corruption, she turns it into personalities. She says I'm angry. She says you're attacking the board. She says the contract is legitimate consulting. Rachel smiled slightly. And the deed? The deed doesn't care how she explains herself. Exactly. We spent the next hour building the order. First, 17 complaints. Second, 0 verified violations. Third, development timeline. Fourth, access petition. Last, deed, county plat, license survey. Walt looked at the map and laughed once under his breath. All this time she thought she was forcing you to give up a road. Rachel folded her arms. She doesn't need his road. Walt looked at her. Rachel pointed to the lake gate. They need his permission. That sentence changed the room. I could have sent Linda a letter that night. I could have had Rachel notify the HOA that their gate sat on Mercer land. I could have watched panic spread before the county hearing ever started. Instead, I did nothing. The gate stayed open. Residents used the road exactly as they always had. I repaired fence on the south pasture and let Linda believe her petition still had momentum, because Rachel had shown me the better move. Let Linda walk into a public hearing. Let her hold up 17 complaints. Let her call me unreasonable. Let her claim Silver Pines was protecting its lake access, then put the recorded truth on the screen in front of everyone. The next morning, another Silver Pines flyer appeared in my mailbox. Emergency access hearing. Community safety first. Linda's name was printed across the bottom. I pinned it beside the survey map. For months, she had been building a case around the idea that I was standing in the way of her community. Now I knew something she didn't. The ground under her own gate had been Mercer Ridge land all along, and I was going to let her say the wrong thing in public before I proved it. The Heritage County hearing room was full 20 minutes before the meeting started. Silver Pines homeowners packed the chairs. County planners sat behind a long table beneath fluorescent lights. Eric Dalton took a seat near the front in a dark jacket, carrying no papers and wearing the expression of a man who expected other people to do the talking for him. Linda Barrett had enough papers for both of them. She stood beside a projector with a binder marked Community Safety Record. Rachel sat to my right. Daniel Ruiz waited near the aisle after being asked to appear as the county sheriff who had responded to several of the complaints. Linda started exactly where we expected. Silver Pines has spent months attempting to resolve a growing safety problem involving access, livestock activity, road obstruction, and repeated nuisance incidents adjacent to our community. Slide 1 appeared, 17 complaints, dates, categories, sheriff response numbers, no outcomes, just volume. Murmurs moved through the room. Linda pointed toward me. No one enjoys conflict with a neighboring landowner, but when one person's refusal to cooperate affects emergency planning for hundreds of families, the county has an obligation to consider reasonable access. Reasonable. That was the word she used for a road worth millions to Eric Dalton. One county planner leaned forward. Mrs. Barrett, are these confirmed violations? Linda paused. These are documented law enforcement incidents, not an answer. Rachel wrote something on her legal pad, Linda continued. She showed the proposed emergency corridor cutting through my north pasture. She mentioned wildfire evacuation, ambulance response, and future traffic capacity. She did not mention Dalton's 86 luxury homes until a planner asked directly whether the access request was related to pending development. Eric shifted in his chair. Linda answered carefully. The expansion makes long-term safety planning more important, but the need exists independently. Rachel whispered, "There, the first crack." When public comment opened, Linda expected me to defend myself. I didn't. Rachel stood first. "Before Mr. Mercer speaks, we'd like Sheriff Ruiz to clarify the record Mrs. Barrett just presented. Daniel walked to the microphone. Rachel held up the complaint list. Sheriff, 17 calls? Yes. How many resulted in citations against Caleb Mercer? 0. The room changed. How many resulted in criminal findings? 0. Verified nuisance violations? 0. Linda moved toward her microphone. That doesn't mean the concerns weren't legitimate. Daniel looked at her. It means my office did not verify them. Rachel didn't let the moment breathe too long. She projected Daniel's reports. Unfounded, no violation observed, no obstruction present, no action required. 17 complaints stopped looking impressive once the outcomes appeared beside them. A homeowner behind me said, "Why weren't those on her slides?" Linda ignored him. Rachel changed the screen. Now the county planning timeline appeared. Eric Dalton's first North Shore expansion application, 18 months earlier, the first access rejection, then the second, then the date of complaint number 1. Rachel pointed at the sequence. The development needed a second northern route before Mr. Mercer became a documented nuisance. Silence. Then she showed the engineering plan. The proposed road crossed my pasture exactly where Linda's survey crew had placed its stakes. Eric finally spoke. This is standard preliminary planning. Rachel turned toward him. On land you don't own? His jaw tightened. A county planner asked Linda whether Silver Pines had recorded rights across Mercer Ridge for expansion or construction. No final determination has been made. Again, not an answer. I stood. For the first time that night, every face turned toward me. I've heard my ranch called dangerous, obstructive, and uncooperative. I looked at the complaint list. 17 calls. 0 violations, then at the development map. And somehow every complaint clustered around the exact ground Mr. Dalton needs for his road. Linda stepped closer to her microphone. This isn't about Mr. Dalton. It's about protecting Silver Pines and preserving our access to our lake facilities. Rachel's hand stopped over her folder. That was the sentence we had been waiting for. She looked at me. I gave one small nod. Linda kept talking. The HOA has both a responsibility and a right to protect its lake access from interference by an adjacent landowner. Rachel stood slowly. Your lake access? Linda looked annoyed. Yes, Rachel reached beneath the table and lifted the final folder. Not the complaints, not the development plans, the certified deed, the old county plat. Thomas Reed's licensed survey. The room quieted before she even opened it. Rachel walked toward the projector. Then I think Heritage County should see exactly where Silver Pines property ends. Linda's confidence flickered. Just once. Behind her, Eric Dalton leaned forward. Rachel placed the first certified map under the document camera. A boundary line appeared across the screen. Older than Silver Pines. Older than Linda's board. Older than Eric Dalton's development. And it ran directly toward the gate Linda had just called hers. Rachel zoomed in. The certified plat showed the Mercer boundary crossing beneath the main Silver Pines Lake gate, following part of the access road, then bending along the shoreline toward the old dam service strip. Nobody spoke. A county land officer at the front asked for the survey packet. Rachel handed it over. He checked Thomas Reed's seal, compared the legal description to the recorded deed, then looked at the projected line again. This survey is consistent with the recorded chain of title. A man in the second row said, "What does that mean?" The officer answered before Linda could. It means Silver Pines does not own the ground beneath this section of the lake access. The room went completely still. Linda stared at the map. That cannot be correct. Rachel slid the old maintenance agreement onto the screen. You have a limited historical access privilege. You do not have fee ownership. Linda looked toward Eric. He was no longer sitting comfortably. Rachel continued. That privilege allows existing lake and maintenance access. It does not authorize road expansion, construction traffic, developer use, or new survey activity. One of the county planners turned to Eric. So your proposed northern route depends on rights your project does not have? Eric leaned toward his microphone. We were operating under representation from the HOA. Every head turned back toward Linda. She recovered fast. Boundaries can be interpreted differently. Historic records are often unclear. That was the sentence she should not have said. I stood. No, Linda. I pointed at the deed. Recorded deeds don't move because a board votes. For the first time since the 17th complaint, she had no answer. Rachel placed the final document on the table, the consulting agreement, Linda Barrett, Eric Dalton. Payment contingent on advancement of the North Shore expansion. Now the motive sat beside the land record. A homeowner near the aisle asked, "You were being paid if his road got approved?" Linda's face tightened. This agreement compensated community outreach work. Another voice came from the back. Then why were our dues paying for survey crews? The room broke open. Questions hit from every side. Why were the unfounded complaints presented without outcomes? Why had homeowners been told Caleb refused emergency cooperation when no one had formally negotiated with him? Why was Linda's financial agreement never disclosed? The hearing chair struck the desk once. Enough, the room settled. Looked at Rachel. Does Mr. Mercer intend to terminate existing lawful access? No, Rachel said. He intends to enforce the recorded limits. That mattered. I wasn't there to punish 100 families for Linda's choices. I was there to stop her from turning their access privilege into a developer road. The county suspended consideration of the petition pending formal review of the title, complaint history, and Dalton proposal. That should have ended it. Linda refused to believe it had. At 7 the next morning, Walt called me. You better come down to the lake gate. I drove there and found Linda beside a survey truck. Chris Nolan was back. 3 fresh orange stakes lay on the ground. I parked without blocking anyone. Linda, she turned. The hearing changed nothing. We're preserving the corridor while the county reviews the matter. You were told the ground isn't yours. We dispute that, then dispute it on paper. Chris hesitated. Linda pointed toward the shoulder. Continue. He picked up a stake. A sheriff's cruiser rolled in behind them. Daniel Ruiz stepped out. A Heritage County land officer followed in another vehicle carrying a folder. Linda folded her arms. Sheriff, this is a civil property dispute. Daniel nodded. That's why the county verified the parcel before I came. The land officer opened the folder. Certified deed, recorded plat, licensed survey. No construction or survey right held by Silver Pines across this section. Linda's face went pale. We have access rights. Limited existing access, the officer said. Not this. Daniel looked at the unused stakes, then at Chris. Don't place those. Chris set the stake back down. Linda stepped forward. You cannot allow one rancher to obstruct an entire community. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he pointed at the ground beneath her boots. Mrs. Barrett, he's not obstructing your property. Silence. The lake moved softly against the shore. Daniel finished the sentence. You're on Mr. Mercer's property. Take your crew and leave. Nobody cheered. That made it stronger. Chris loaded the stakes. The survey truck backed away. Linda stood there another second, surrounded by land she had spent months pretending she controlled. Then she walked to her SUV. Before getting in, she looked at me. I didn't smile, didn't gloat, didn't say a word. She drove away. Daniel stayed beside the gate. So what now? I looked at the road. Silver Pines residents still had lawful permission to use. Now we make the rules match the deed. For the first time, Linda Barrett had been told to leave the ground she thought gave her leverage over me. The next question was what I would do with the leverage that actually belonged to Mercer Ridge Ranch. Rachel answered that before I could. "We don't punish the homeowners," she said. "We fix the record." 3 days later, Heritage County issued its formal decision. The forced access petition was denied. The county cited the same facts Linda had tried to bury beneath 17 complaints. 0 verified nuisance violations, 0 citations, no existing right for Silver Pines to expand across Mercer Ridge Ranch, and no lawful basis to convert a limited historic access privilege into a developer corridor. Eric Dalton withdrew the North Shore expansion application before the week was over. Without the northern route, the numbers didn't work. The expensive eastern alternative made the 86-home project far less attractive, and his options on the adjoining land began expiring. Linda's position collapsed even faster. Silver Pines homeowners demanded the board release its financial records. That review exposed the money spent on unauthorized survey work and Linda's consulting agreement with Dalton. At a special meeting, she was removed as president. No dramatic arrest, no courtroom screaming. Just signatures, votes, and records finally working the way they were supposed to. Rachel brought me the draft access agreement the following Monday. We sat at the same kitchen table where I had once spread out 17 complaints and wondered what they meant. Now a single document mattered more than all of them. Section 3, Rachel said. I read it. Silver Pines formally acknowledged that the main lake gate, part of the access road, and the identified shoreline tract remained within Mercer Ridge Ranch ownership. Existing residents could continue using the established access as they had before, but the agreement prohibited widening the road, commercial construction traffic, developer access, new survey work, or any change in use without written approval from Mercer Ridge Ranch. Silver Pines also accepted responsibility for maintenance tied to its use. Walt read over my shoulder. You could shut them out. I could create a fight over the scope of the old privilege, so why not? I looked toward the lake, because most of the people in Silver Pines hadn't planted those stakes. They hadn't manufactured 17 complaints. They had trusted a woman who kept telling them she spoke for their safety, because ownership isn't the same thing as permission to be cruel. Rachel nodded once. That sentence is why this agreement works. I signed. So did the new interim Silver Pines board. Heritage County recorded it. For the first time, the boundary everyone had argued about existed not just in old deeds and survey calls, but in a modern agreement nobody could pretend not to understand. A few weeks later, Thomas Reed returned with a permanent brass marker. He set it beside the lake access road where the old monument and modern survey agreed. Mercer Ridge Ranch. Private property. Nothing else. No threat. No warning. Just a fact. Daniel stopped by that afternoon. He leaned against his cruiser and looked at the marker. Think I'll get called out here again? Not 17 times, he laughed. Then his expression settled. You handled this right, Caleb. I got angry. Getting angry wasn't the problem. He looked toward Silver Pines. What mattered was you never gave Linda the version of you she was trying to create that stayed with me. For months, she had needed me loud, reckless, unreasonable, a man who could be reduced to a paragraph in a petition. Instead, I kept every report, every photograph, every survey point, every deed. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It accumulated. That evening, I walked down to the old dam. The light was low over Silver Pine Lake, and water moved through the spillway with a steady sound that had outlasted every argument about where a line belonged. No patrol lights crossed the fence. No orange stakes waited in the pasture. No white SUV sat beyond the gate. The ranch was quiet again. I thought about my father keeping deeds in that fireproof cabinet. My brother repairing fences that still stood. Men who had protected the place long before anyone called it valuable enough to fight over. Linda once told me boundaries weren't as permanent as owners thought. She was right about one thing. A line on paper means very little if nobody is willing to understand it, record it, and defend it. But she was wrong about who got to move it. Power can shift, Boards can vote, developers can make offers, people can repeat a lie 17 times. None of that changes where a recorded deed says the ground begins. Rested my hand on the wooden gate and looked across the lake. Mercer Ridge Ranch was still mine. Silver Pines still had its lawful access. And nobody had to lose what was rightfully theirs for me to protect what was rightfully mine. That was the part Linda never understood. Justice wasn't making her powerless. It was making the truth impossible to ignore.
And maybe that the lessons we're carrying home from Caleb's story. When somebody keeps repeating the same accusation, it can start to feel like the number of complaints master more the facts. Caleb didn't answer 17 complaints with 17 arguments. He kept the reports, he photographed the survey stakes, he found the audits, he hired people who understand the law, and he gave the truth enough time to become clear. There's quite a trend in that. Standing your ground doesn't always mean raising your voice. Sometimes it means knowing exactly where the line is, keeping good records, and refusing to become the person somebody else needs you to be. And when Caleb finally had the legal power to make life difficult for the whole subdivision, he didn't use it that way. He protected his property while reserving the residents' lawful access. That's not weakness. That's knowing the difference between protecting what's yours and punishing people who wasn't responsible. If you believe Caleb handled it the right way, type yes in the comments. And if you ever deal with an HOA or property line dispute, or simply had to stand firm when the facts were on your side, I'd like to hear how you handle it. And if story about land, justice, and ordinary people standing steady when the razor comes means something to you, subscribe and stay with us. There are more HOA and rent story ahead, and sometimes the strongest ending isn't somebody getting even. It's everybody finally respecting the lie.